Rainbow Meadow existed in a state of perpetual bloom. Every inch of soil held moisture, and every stem stood tall, drinking from the constant cycle of the valley. At the center of this harmony floated Puff. He was a massive, shifting presence in the sky, his form dense and heavy with the weight of stored water. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, casting a cooling shadow over the vibrant grasses below. Every Tuesday, the rhythm of the valley reached its peak. Puff would drift low over the riverbanks, tilting his edges to release a steady, life-giving rain. The water hit the ground in a rhythmic patter, soaking into the earth until the stream surged and the flowers bowed under the gentle weight of the mist. It was a perfect, clockwork system. The grass grew thick, the insects hummed in the damp air, and the entire meadow thrived under his constant care. Puff watched the valley turn a deeper shade of green with every drop he released. He was the heartbeat of the meadow, the silent guardian that ensured nothing ever withered. Below, the life of the valley moved in sync with his movements, waiting for that weekly release that kept the world alive and vibrant. Everything was balanced. Everything was full. The following Tuesday, the rhythm faltered. The valley waited, stems leaning upward, leaves spread wide to catch the expected mist. Puff drifted into his usual position, his form still casting a familiar shadow, but the weight he usually carried felt absent. He tilted his edges, waiting for the familiar pull of gravity to draw the water down. Nothing happened. He squeezed his sides, contracting his mass with a sudden, sharp effort. He pushed against his own boundaries, straining to release even a single drop, but only a dry, hollow puff of air escaped into the stillness. The sound was thin and pathetic, vanishing instantly into the heat. He shook his fluffy frame, vibrating from core to edge, hoping to dislodge the moisture he felt sure was hidden within. He pulsed, he strained, he twisted, but the sky remained stubbornly clear. The air grew heavy with a sudden, unnatural stillness. Below, the grass did not stir. The river did not ripple. Puff hovered, frozen in the blue expanse, his internal pressure gone, replaced by a terrifying lightness. He was empty. The change was immediate. The river, usually a rushing artery of life, began to retreat from its banks, where water once swirled. Thick, gray mud surfaced, hardening under the relentless sun. The vibrant green of the meadow dulled to a brittle yellow, the grass bowing not from the weight of rain, but from the lack of it. Milo stood at the edge of the receding bank, his boots sinking into the drying sludge. He looked up, shielding his eyes against the glare. High above, Puff was not drifting with his usual steady momentum. The cloud was twitching, his edges fraying as he shivered in the intense heat. Milo watched the cloud struggle to maintain his position, the usual soft glow replaced by a jagged, frantic motion. Milo turned, his jaw set, and looked toward the horizon. He reached down, tightened the straps of his pack, and began to move. "I will help you find it," he promised, his eyes fixed on the shivering mass above. They were now partners in a desperate search. Milo navigated the dense thicket at the edge of the woods, his boots crunching over brittle twigs. He scanned the canopy until he spotted a flash of deep, midnight blue plumage. Luna sat perched on a gnarled branch, her head tilted sharply as she watched them approach. She did not greet them. Instead, she hopped down to a flat stone covered in layers of gray dust. Milo reached the base of the tree and waited, his breath hitching as the bird began to work. Luna used her beak to scrape away the grime, revealing a scroll of parchment. She pecked at the edges, unfurling the stiff material until a series of jagged symbols became visible. Milo leaned in, his fingers tracing the air near the markings. Luna let out a sharp, piercing chirp that echoed through the trees. She tapped a specific illustration of towering, translucent figures looming over a reservoir. "The wind giants," she chirped. She pointed her wing toward the jagged, distant peaks of the great dry desert. The message was unmistakable. The rain had not simply vanished. It had been forcibly taken. Milo stood back, his gaze locking onto the silhouette of the mountains on the horizon. The objective was no longer a mystery. He had a destination, a culprit, and a path forward. He adjusted his pack and signaled to Puff. The cloud drifted lower, his form tightening. They turned away from the meadow, leaving the safety of the trees behind. The transition was not gradual. As they moved beyond the perimeter of the meadow, the ground beneath Milo's boots shifted from damp, yielding earth to hard-packed, sun-bleached clay. Every step sent a jolt of resistance up his shins. The air grew thin and tasted of grit, lacking the moisture that usually clung to the valley breeze. Puff hovered lower, his mass casting a long, flickering shadow over the terrain. But the heat from the ground rose to meet him, causing his edges to ripple with visible strain. They marched for hours, the landscape flattening into a featureless expanse of cracked gray stone. Milo stopped to adjust his pack, his hands brushing against the dry, parched surface of a rock. It was hot enough to sting his palms. He looked ahead, where the horizon shimmered in a distorted haze, blurring the line between the sky and the earth. The lush greenery of home was now a distant memory, replaced by the skeletal remains of shrubs that had long since surrendered to the drought. Puff let out a low, rumbling sound, his form expanding and contracting in a rhythmic, labored pulse. He was fighting the heat, holding his remaining moisture inside like a shield. Milo wiped the sweat from his forehead, his eyes fixed on the jagged, distant peaks that marked the entrance to the desert. With a steadying breath, he pushed forward. The terrain tilted sharply upward as they reached the base of the Mountain of Echoes. The slopes were composed of loose, jagged slate that clattered underfoot with every movement. Milo focused on his footing, his eyes tracing the path that wound through the narrow, vertical crevices. He stepped onto a patch of weathered stone, but the surface gave way beneath his weight. His boot slid, his center of gravity shifted violently, and he tumbled forward. He threw his arms out to catch himself, his voice erupting in a sharp, desperate shout. "Watch out!" The sound hit the canyon wall and did not dissipate. It bounced, amplified, and distorted, slamming back at them from every direction. "Watch out! Watch out! Watch out!" The mountain roared the warning back a dozen times, the sheer volume of the sound waves vibrating through the air. The ground beneath them shuddered in response to the sonic pressure. Stones rattled in their sockets, and the cliff face groaned as if waking from a long slumber. Milo scrambled to regain his balance, his hands clawing at the sharp rock, but the vibration was too intense. A massive, jagged boulder near the summit shifted, its base grinding against the mountainside. It tipped, then broke free, plummeting toward the path ahead. The earth shook with a rhythmic, violent force, and the sound of the mountain collapsing in on itself drowned out all other noise. Milo pressed himself against the rock wall, his breath trapped in his chest. The dust cloud hung thick in the air, slowly settling over the debris left by the rockfall. Milo coughed, waving a hand in front of his face as the visibility cleared. Where the boulder had impacted, a jagged fissure now gaped wide in the mountainside. He stepped closer, peering into the dark cavity. The interior shimmered with a pale, rhythmic light. He reached out, his fingers brushing against a cool, liquid surface that pulsed against the cave wall. It was water, trapped behind a natural dam of stone and sediment. Milo braced his boots against the slope, pushing his shoulder against a large, wedge-shaped rock that blocked the flow. It did not budge. He looked at Puff, who drifted closer, his form pressing against the stone barrier. Together, they applied pressure. The rock groaned, shifted, and finally tumbled away with a heavy thud. The release was instantaneous. A torrent of trapped water surged from the cave, carving a new path down the mountain slope. The sound was a sudden, rushing roar that drowned out the wind. Milo watched as the water gathered speed. The valley was drinking again, but as the last of the trapped water drained away, he looked up at Puff. The cloud remained thin, his center still hollow and empty. The relief of the mountain stream vanished as they crossed the threshold into the great dry desert. The landscape shifted from jagged rock to an endless, undulating expanse of sand that stretched toward the horizon. The heat was not merely a temperature, it was a physical weight. It pressed down on the ground, causing the air to shimmer. Milo felt the moisture vanishing from his skin, his throat tightening with every breath. He checked his canteen, but it was already light. Beside him, Puff drifted lower, his form flickering as the sun beat down on his edges. The cloud was a pale shadow of his former self. They walked for hours, their pace slowing as the sand deepened. Milo stopped, his lungs burning, and leaned against a ridge of sand. The silence of the desert was absolute, broken only by the dry hiss of wind. Every direction offered the same blinding, golden glare. They turned away from the mountain and pushed deeper into the dunes, their shadows stretching long and thin against the burning earth. The horizon finally broke its monotony. Rising from the center of a vast, flat basin stood a fortress that defied the desert. It was not built of stone or mud, but of thousands of glass jars, stacked in towering, translucent walls that caught the sun. Milo shielded his eyes, squinting against the glare. The structure hummed with a low, vibrating frequency. He approached the nearest wall, his hand hovering inches from the surface. The glass was searing to the touch, radiating heat. Inside the jars, the contents were unmistakable. Thousands of shimmering liquid droplets clung to the inner surfaces. Puff drifted closer, his form expanding slightly as he sensed the proximity of the water. He hovered over the jagged peaks. Milo walked along the perimeter, his boots crunching on the sand. The scale of the horde was immense. He stopped before the main gate, a heavy archway. Sitting atop the highest point, a figure waited, watching. King Thorn shifted, his body scraping against the glass walls with a sound like grinding stones. He descended from the summit, his movements slow and deliberate, each step causing the sand to settle beneath his weight. He stopped 10 paces from Milo, his presence dominating the clearing. "My desert was dying," the king rumbled, his voice low and resonant, vibrating deep within the chest of anyone who heard it. He gestured toward the vast, barren dunes surrounding the fortress. "The sun takes everything. The wind takes the rest. I took what I needed to survive, and I will not relinquish it to satisfy the whims of a wandering cloud." Milo stepped forward, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He looked at the jars, then back at the king, but the figure remained immovable, a wall of defiance. Puff hovered behind Milo, his silver light dimming as he faced the king. The cloud tried to expand, to loom, but the king merely tapped a sharp finger against a nearby jar, the sound ringing out like a warning bell. Milo opened his mouth to speak, but the king held up a hand, his expression unyielding. Milo took a breath, ready to challenge the king again, but the words died in his throat. The light above the fortress shifted. A deep, unnatural bruise purple bled across the sky, rapidly deepening into an absolute, suffocating black. The temperature plummeted, the searing heat of the desert replaced by an icy, biting draft that whipped sand into stinging needles. Milo looked toward the horizon and saw it. A wall of darkness, miles high and wide, erasing the desert floor as it surged forward. It was not a storm of rain, but a churning, violent mass of grit and debris. The ground beneath their feet began to shudder, a rhythmic thumping that grew into a continuous, low-frequency roar. King Thorn turned away from the jars, his posture shifting from defiance to primal alertness. The king looked at the approaching wall, his needles rattling as the wind speed increased. The conflict between them vanished into insignificance. The air became thick with dust, turning the world into a blurred, monochromatic nightmare. The first wave of the storm hit, and the sky fell. The impact arrived like a physical blow. The wind did not just blow, it hammered. Sand became a solid, abrasive projectile, scouring everything in its path. Milo was thrown backward, his boots sliding uselessly over the shifting dunes. He slammed into the ground, the grit filling his mouth and stinging his eyes until he was forced to squeeze them shut. The roar was absolute, a deafening, mechanical scream that vibrated through his very bones. He reached out, fingers clawing at the loose, dry earth, finding no purchase. He was sliding toward the edge of the fortress, the wind threatening to lift him entirely. He lunged, his hand catching on a thick, woody cactus branch protruding from the sand. He pulled, his muscles straining against the relentless pressure of the gale. The branch groaned but held. Milo wrapped his arms around the base, burying his face against the plant to shield his lungs from the suffocating dust. Around him, the world had ceased to exist. The wind surged again, a violent gust that threatened to snap the branch, but Milo held on, his body rigid, waiting for the end of the onslaught. The storm intensified, a screaming vortex that threatened to tear Milo from his anchor. Just as his grip began to fail, a shadow fell over him, not the shadow of the storm, but something softer, wider. Puff had moved. The cloud, usually light and drifting, began to swell. He drew in the surrounding air, his edges expanding, thickening, and hardening. He pushed his own mass outward, stretching until he became a colossal, opaque wall between the wind and the ground. The impact of the sand changed instantly. Instead of the sharp, stinging bite against skin, there was only a muffled, dull thudding against the cloud's surface. Puff groaned, a sound like distant thunder, as he absorbed the relentless abrasive force. He did not retreat. He anchored himself into the dunes, his fluffy frame flattening and broadening to seal the gap. Milo looked up, seeing the cloud's underside ripple as it took the brunt of the gale. Every grain of sand that would have shredded the desert inhabitants was caught in the cloud's dense, vaporous body. Puff was losing his shape, his edges fraying under the strain, but he held the line. He turned his back to the wind, becoming a living shield. The roar of the storm continued, but the pressure on the ground eased. Puff remained locked in place, a massive, silver-tinted barrier holding back the destruction, sacrificing his own form to preserve the life below him. He was no longer just a cloud. He was a fortress of mist. Behind the wall of mist, the desert floor trembled. King Thorn remained crouched, his gaze fixed on the shifting dunes beyond the cloud's protective edge. He saw the way the wind tore at the earth, and then he looked at the small, shivering creatures huddled in the sand. His priorities shifted. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace, extending his thick, woody limbs outward to create a secondary shelter. He beckoned the smaller desert animals toward him. They scrambled into the space beneath his reach, pressing against the solid, unyielding mass of his frame. King Thorn lowered his upper structure, curling his limbs inward to form a tight, protective canopy. He did not look at the jars of water anymore. He focused entirely on the movement of the creatures beneath him, adjusting his position to block the stray grit that bypassed the cloud's barrier. His movements were slow, calculated, and steady. He felt the vibration of the storm through the ground, but he did not flinch. He became a secondary anchor. The storm continued to scream, but beneath the king's reach, there was a pocket of relative calm, a testament to a sudden, protective instinct. The howling ceased as abruptly as it had begun. The wind died, leaving behind a heavy, ringing silence that pressed against the ears. Dust hung in the air, thick and gray, slowly settling over the dunes like a shroud. Puff sagged, his massive form thinning as he released the tension of the barrier. He drifted lower, his edges ragged and translucent. Milo pushed himself up from the sand, his movements stiff and slow. He shook his head, sending a spray of grit into the air, and looked around. The dunes had been reshaped, their smooth curves replaced by jagged, wind-scoured ridges. The landscape looked raw, exposed, and entirely fragile. Nearby, the desert animals emerged from beneath the king, blinking in the dim, filtered light. They moved tentatively, testing the ground that had been so violently churned. Milo walked a few paces, his boots sinking into the loose, shifted sand. He saw the remnants of the storm's path, cracked earth, uprooted scrub, and the scattered, broken fragments of the glass jars. The desert was silent, broken, and waiting. Milo stood still, realizing that the world they occupied was far more delicate than he had ever understood. Milo stepped toward the scattered remains of the glass horde. Shards lay half buried in the sand, catching the pale, filtered light. He knelt, picking up a jagged piece of glass that still held a single, trapped bead of moisture. He held it out toward the king. The king remained still, his heavy frame anchored in the sand, but his gaze followed the movement of the boy's hand. Milo stood and gestured to the surrounding dunes, where the earth remained parched despite the proximity of the vessels. "Look at this," Milo said, his voice steady against the quiet. "If you keep the water in jars, it stays trapped. It dies in the dark. But if we let it go, it flows." He dropped the shard. It clicked against the sand. Water is not meant to be a treasure. It is meant to be a path. Ha! King Thorn stared at the broken glass. His thick limbs, which had been braced for a fight, slowly relaxed, settling deeper into the dunes. The king did not speak, but the tension began to dissipate. He shifted his weight, turning his focus toward the horizon. A slow, deliberate nod followed. Puff drifted forward, his movements fluid and purposeful. He hovered directly over the scattered broken glass where the last of the trapped water pooled in the sand. As he lowered his base, the air around him began to hum. He expanded his edges, reaching down until his vapor touched the moisture. The water reacted, rising in thin, shimmering ribbons to meet him. It was a slow, steady migration. Puff pulled the liquid into his core, his previously ragged and translucent frame thickening with every drop. He grew opaque, his gray edges darkening before shifting into a brilliant, pearlescent white. A soft, silver light began to pulse from within him, casting long, dancing shadows across the dunes. The light was not harsh. It was steady and rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. Milo shielded his eyes, watching as the cloud transformed. The weight of the water returned to Puff, but it did not drag him down. Instead, the moisture seemed to fuel the glow, turning him into a floating lantern against the darkening desert sky. He pulsed again, the silver light intensifying until it illuminated the entire clearing. The king watched, his gaze fixed on the radiant mass hovering above the wreckage. Puff had stopped being a victim of the drought. He was now a beacon, heavy with the power to restore. Puff drifted upward, his silver light casting a soft glow over the parched dunes. He paused, centering himself over the heart of the desert. With a slow, deliberate contraction of his vaporous form, he began to release the moisture. It did not fall as a storm, but as a steady, gentle drizzle. The first drops hit the burning sand with a faint hiss, turning the dust into dark, rich earth. Milo watched from below as the moisture soaked deep into the dunes, disappearing into the soil. Where the water touched, the sand shifted. Tiny, dormant seeds, buried for years, reacted to the sudden hydration. Green shoots pushed through the surface, unfurling rapidly in the cool, damp air. Within minutes, the barren expanse was covered in a carpet of vibrant color. Flowers bloomed in the wake of the drizzle, their petals opening. King Thorn stood amidst the transformation, his needles brushing against the new growth. He reached down, touching a leaf that had sprouted near his base. The desert was no longer a place of survival through hoarding. It was a place of growth through release. Puff continued his slow drift, moving across the dunes. His work in the desert complete, Puff turned toward the horizon. He drifted back over the jagged peaks, his form light and steady. He arrived at the Rainbow Meadow, where the streams had long been shallow and sluggish. As he passed overhead, he released the final remainder of his moisture. The water fell into the riverbeds, filling them until they surged against the banks. The meadow turned lush, the grass deepening in color. Milo stood in the meadow, watching the cloud move across the sky. Both lands now thrived, connected by the water that moved between them. Whenever the wind stirred the air, the people looked up to see Puff drifting above. He was no longer a cloud defined by what he held, but by what he gave. He had learned that true abundance comes only when you let it go.